There's a kind of wisdom there, is there not? Especially in this place. So, Libra is open to any kind of sexual creative expression as long as it's not degrading or humiliating. They're wide open. Will entertain any idea, as long as it's not degrading or humiliating. So you have the whole the full spectrum available there. Libra can be naturally monogamous, although will naturally flirt. Libra can't help but flirt because it's in their genes. So, but in most cases, it's quite innocent. Most cases.
And then Venus would carry some of those characteristics with it if it's wherever it is.
If Venus is in Libra?
Wherever Venus is, it carries some of those characteristics.
As an archetype. That's why all human beings flirt. But flirting is actually a preliminary to sexual selection. And you see how this goes right back to the next step, Scorpio. And see, one thing that humans don't yet realize is that, you know, it's been thought up until now, really, that other forms of life, specifically animal, have a much more finely attuned sense of smell. And, you know, it can seem obvious when you watch dogs and animals and cats and other animals, but the reality is that the human ability, response to smell, is just as strong. It's just not as overt as in certain animals. And this can be proved through pheromones and how people interact with one another. Because it's all determined through the nose, right here. That's your initial line. You can somebody at a scent level. And even if you can't smell them, you're smelling them. That's the point I'm making. It's a silence that's occurring, but it's occurring.
Well, deodorants are not too cool, now, are they? Deodorants are not too cool.
It's another example of patriarchal requirement to repress something natural called senses, or the body, and what it naturally does. And it's only because you're conditioning that you perceive this odor or that as not so nice. When I lived with the Navajo a long time, you know what it's like to hang out in a hogan in the winter?
Yeah.
With 6 families there, none of which have taken a shower for 4 or 5 months, or a bath. But when you live naturally, it doesn't even register. It's just natural the way we're living. One of my greatest shocks, I spent 14 months in the jungle of Vietnam. Straight, 14 straight, without a break. And my greatest shock was getting on an airplane, American aircraft, with American stewardesses. Here's the woman, with all their perfumes and all their stuff, and I hadn't been around that for 14 months. And suddenly I'm on this aircraft with these wonderful American women, and all these new smells. They were literally like new smells. I had to remind myself that was the world I used to come from. And then to me it was offensive, actually, when I first got on the aircraft. It wasn't something I was registering as enjoyment, though I liked this smell. It was actually offensive. Because I had gotten used, obviously, living naturally out in the jungles. So it's really a conditioning issue. So, yes, thank you. Libra is also an archetype that relates with homosexuality. It's also the archetype that applies to the cases that are called hermaphrodites. That's a Libra phenomenon.
What is that? What is that?
That's where they both have the genitalia male-female. And in fact, in ancient Rome, those were the most sacred of all people. And then they were routinely killed at puberty because they didn't want them to have sex. They wanted them to remain pure. So they had to kill them to remain pure. What's that tell us?
Go fuck yourself.
Mars and Taurus. Let's bring this right up to speed. Guess who has Mars in Libra? Conjunct Neptune.
Who?
Guess who has Mars in Libra conjunct Neptune? That's been in our news for the last year. Mr. Clinton. You certainly see the clear application of flirting, huh? So, but then you put that together through the inconjunct in Taurus moon in the end. Now it becomes compulsive. Think how easy it must have been for him and Lewinsky. Lewinsky herself is a stalker. Let's face it. I mean, she stated herself she wanted to go to Washington, D.C., and she was going to take her presidential knee pads. No, they both got what they deserve. Okay. Any questions on the Libra deal? Cool.
Got to the 8th house cusp.
Yes, we've got now to Scorpio.
How the personality problems that can come up with Libra. Did you already touch on it?
I'm sorry?
The personality disorders that can come up with Libra. Did you already talk about that?
Personality disorders linked with Libra?
Multiple personality.
One can be multiple personality.
What is the personality?
Hmm?
The physiology, the body part?
Remember when we talked about Taurus?
Same one?
Same. One thing, too, I mean, an extension of that thought, because the soul, you know, prior to birth, picks all of its conditions, even including a body type, the genetic structure, including what it wants to look like in that life. So in this sense, Libra connects to the genetics of what one's body type is going to be. And it's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, you'll have many clients in your time of, why am I looking like this? The person's got a negative relationship to how they're appearing. And I question, why am I looking like this? And that's something I've had to deal with my daughter. She's born with a severe genetic condition called Turner syndrome. It doesn't allow the kid to grow. She's 16, she's still 5 feet. You know, so of course, Papa, why? You know, why? And in her case, I gave her the answer. And she intuitively understood the answer. It made total sense to her. And the answer in her case, I mean, look how things can work. And this is when if you get really adept at astrology, you're going to be amazed how things really work. And in her particular case, her last life, she was born into royalty. Her family was killed, the entire family. The last one to be killed, witnessing the destruction of her whole family. She was killed at 10. So, of course, at birth, her greatest fear, I mean, even when she was little, she says, Papa, I'll never make it to 10. And never knowing why she didn't know why she was saying these words. But, I mean, look at the symbolism here. When a girl gets Turner syndrome, it's almost as if they're a child their whole life. So you see the soul's trying to play a trick on, I'm going to make this condition in this body, so... I mean, when you get really skilled at uncovering shit. And when you find the answer, and it's the right answer, the person knows it. Even if they don't want it. Something's true, we know it's true, whether we like it or not. We can deny it upside one side down the other, but it's still true. And we know it. So, we get to Scorpio. How much time do you need for your Corona thing, Mark?
I was thinking I'd do like an hour talk, and then if people wanted an example chart, I would do that.
How many of you guys, you know, you guys have been doing some heavy-duty work since you've been here. How many would like to have, say, relatively speaking, a Sunday evening free, just to space out? No? Because what I'm thinking is going ahead and allowing Mark to do his thing now. And that would free up time for at least one evening.
Yeah, it sure feels right not to go into Scorpio right now. It feels right to me not to go into Scorpio right now.
That's what I'm picking up. We should probably start with fresh on a Monday morning and... Well, let's do it that way. So.
What I want to do is give you a kind of metaphysical overview, just because I know for myself, it was a real hard to grasp what Chiron was, you know, and without any kind of conceptual basis, it was hard to apply it. And then I want to put it in because my understanding of Chiron came totally out of evolutionary astrology. And so I want to look at the planetary nodes a little in terms of that. And that might be hard for some of the beginners, but it's, you know, the nodes are still the application of the archetypes, just deeper, and they'll show past. And then afterwards, if you want to see a chart, we'll do a chart and show kind of how I work with it. So to start to understand Chiron, you have to look at we're entering the new age, the Aquarian age, and for the last 8,000 years or so, the conditioning pattern has been patriarchy. And because we're transferring ages, all of those dynamics that Jeffrey talks about when he talked about Virgo today, all of those are coming to a head with the intention of beginning a new cycle, you know, ending the distortion of patriarchy. So in a really general way, what Chiron is, it's the encapsulation of all of those issues, all of the conditioning patterns of superiority, inferiority, the structures of society, the haves, the have-nots, you know, the male suppression of the feminine. And Chiron will show how you, as an individual, have been impacted. So it's that wound. It also represents your way of being able to heal that wound. How you can get in touch with natural law. So it's kind of a dual archetype in that way, in my opinion. And I have to look at it in both ways, because we've all taken on patriarchal conditioning. Chiron will show that. It will also show, or give you the opportunity to envision how you would be a human being. So now I'm going to just talk in terms of evolution. hundreds of thousands of years, human beings lived in relationship to nature. Now, the very word chiron means one who knows how to use hands. The evolutionary step that the human being took that made it distinctive pretty much from all other species is being able to use its hands and create technologies that led to it being able to alter its environment to create more security. What I'll get to later is, based on the need for security, Chiron's linked to both Pluto and the moon. Now, when human beings were using this skill to live naturally, that was the concept of stewardship, living in co-equal harmony with nature, learning the patterns of nature in order to live successfully, to create culture. Because by doing this, you could have culture. Now, it's interesting to look, and I forgot to pass them out. I have copies of Chiron's birth chart back there, but it doesn't matter. Chiron was discovered in Taurus in the 4th house. That's the ultimate symbol of stewardship, of land, creating home and security. But also, if you think about that same archetype in terms of patriarchy, what does it represent? It represents possession, the needing to control other people in order to feel secure. So do you see how, if you look at it both ways, you get that? So when we do our comparison of how we lived in natural law, as Jeff often says, it was inclusion, it was sharing. People didn't own property. There was no status where one person was than another, inferiority, superiority. There was no money, equal exchange based on barter. So again, if you look at that symbol, you can see that when patriarchy took control, money owned land. If you look really deeply at that symbol, it could represent the nuclear family. Matriarchy had no nuclear family. If you really want to look at it, the Republicans love that symbol because it means family values. Taurus, 4th house. And look at the way they've used that. What does that mean? Basically, it's the ultimate form of patriarchy, how they use that. Now, when you use the planetary nodes of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter are all in Capricorn for everybody. They move very slowly. And what that represents in this system of astrology is around 6500 BC, the Capricorn sub-age of Cancer was about the time that the shift happened from matriarchy to patriarchy. Does everyone understand that in terms of ages?
6,500?
Approximately 6,500 BC. So for any of you, if you know where your Capricorn is, individually, whatever house that's in, will help tell you where the initial imprint of patriarchy affected you most strongly.
Ooh.
Yeah, ooh. Or it might be, there's quite a variety. They can fluctuate 10 degrees even, so it could be in 2 different houses. But it's a real powerful way to, Walter.
You say it was discovered, Chiron was discovered in Taurus.
When it was discovered, the birth chart for like the discovery of Chiron. Yeah.
What birth chart would be the 4th house of what birth chart?
In other words, Chiron was discovered at 10 a.m. It has a birth chart. It's now in your hand.
Oh.
That's it.
Wait, but Taurus is in the 5th house.
Chiron itself is in the 4th.
Oh, it was Capricorn, the nodes of the planet Saturn, Jupiter, and
Pluto.
Pluto.
And look at what that represents. It represents the soul, the structures of society that it created, and the belief systems. Saturn, Jupiter, all based on patriarchy, Capricorn. Now that becomes really significant when you look at Chiron's nodal axis, because Chiron's south node is always in Aries or Taurus. Early Taurus, late Aries. So most often, either the north nodes of Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, or the south nodes, the north nodes are in Cancer, make squares to Chiron's nodes. The nodal axis of Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, from either the north or the south node, depending, because there is variance, almost always square the south node of Chiron. And so a part of what that shows is that the transition was gradual. It didn't happen instantaneously. But from that time, which would be approximately 2000 BC, maybe a little further back, when Taurus was going into the Aries age, that is the time where, especially in Europe, the patriarchy had really been established by that. And so things like patrimony were now in place, which meant in order to have power, a man needed to know who he had slept with, in order to know who his children were, in order to give land away. All the things that we know as patriarchy now. And so Chiron's south node will show in your chart individually where that impacts you. So it will show you, it will give more detail about how you were wounded and the wounding you need to work through based on patriarchy. Now the signs Taurus and Aries are two of the most, probably are, including Scorpio, the most sexual signs in the birth chart. So we can see how Chiron is totally going to relate to sexual conditioning in this way, and relationship patterns, and how for all of us our wounding is how we relate to our, I like to call it primary eros, Aries and Taurus. Now another really interesting fact is that around the time, 2000 BC, there was still this place that, as Jeffrey says, Crete, a little island off Greece. And for whatever reason, well, because it was isolated in an island, this place didn't get infected by patriarchy until much later. And what happened in this culture was that there was a total balance, as far as we can tell, by looking at lots of archaeological data, and there are many books that you can read on this, and even patriarchal historians, that something really unique was happening in Crete. They don't focus on it, but they admit it. So this was, within all of our consciousnesses, this is a model for what could happen for the human species. Total equality, living in balance, no record of war, no record of sexual abuse, none of it. And that's also really significant because if you use geodetic equivalence, which is just a way of superimposing the zodiac on the Earth, Crete is at 27 Aries, conjuncting Chiron South Node. So to me, this has to do with the liberation point and how Chiron is related to liberating from patriarchal conditioning. Now another thing that's important, as Jeff talks about, the liberation point for all of us is through the emotional body, not the intellectual body. So again, if you look at Chiron, when it was discovered in its birthplace, it was in Taurus, in the 4th house. So there's a strong emotional component to the wound and to its healing. And that's really significant because the other now where I want to go is, that's all pretty clear? Okay. What I want to do is, I want to relate Chiron to Pluto and the moon, which are totally emotional planets. Now, it's been interesting, just recently, was all this fuss about, is Pluto even a planet? The fact is what they found is that Pluto probably originates from the same place that Chiron does. And that's why they both have, their angle to the ecliptic is very similar. So they have really erratic orbs. So right away we can say, well, there might be a relationship there. Also, Chiron and Pluto cross orbs of other planets, the only two that do that. Now actually the moon, even though the moon's not quite like a planet, also crosses the orb of the Earth. So these are the only three bodies in the ones that I use in astrology that do this. So there's that relationship. In other words, Pluto is sometimes inside Neptune's orb. Chiron is sometimes inside Saturn's orb. And the moon is sometimes inside the Earth's orb around the sun. Now the other thing about these, in my opinion, is all three are dual archetypes. So when we learn about Pluto, we learn that Pluto represents the soul. And the soul has two desires. One is to separate from everything that it isn't, and the other is to return to the source. Also, based on this, Pluto in the chart represents where you unconsciously have associated your greatest sense of emotional security. That's why in psychological terms, Pluto relates to compulsion. It's how we seek to be secure on an unconscious level. The moon is how we seek to be secure on a more conscious level. Jeffrey often says Pluto is the big S, the moon is the little s. So it's the egocentric identity. And the image that he often uses is the one of a projector. And if you just have diffuse light going through a projector, you don't get an image. So the moon is a lens that creates a distinct self-image so that on your day-to-day basis, you have a name. You know, you have a concept of yourself so that you can act. And that will be in relationship to Pluto. But Pluto's the unconscious desires. Now the other part of the moon that you have to look at is, and this is really related to Chiron, is that there's a dark side of the moon. And so what we've been conditioned via patriarchy in our society is that we can only identify with the gender that we incarnate. I'm a man. In order to be complete, I need to be fulfilled by a woman. I project usually my feminine outside of myself, attempting to be whole. Now what we've learned, and again, I refer to Chiron in Taurus in the 4th house, what we learn in evolutionary astrology is that we have many successful relationships if we're always seeking to be secure outside of ourselves. This is Libra Taurus. So, really what we have to do is learn our own inner security to balance ourselves within in order to actually have successful relationships. So Chiron is related to all this because Chiron, Dane Rudyard in 1936 wrote the book, The Astrology of Personality. Now many people when they talk about Chiron will use a quote that Rudyard used because Rudyard in many ways predicted Chiron. And actually, Rudyard's Chiron is exactly, it's at the closest, what's the word when it's closest to the Earth? Perihelion? Rudyard was born with Chiron at perihelion conjunct the north node of Chiron's birth chart. Pretty interesting. And what Rudyard said was that there would be a higher moon discovered between Saturn and Uranus. Now everyone uses that quote, but nobody defines what a moon is, or a higher moon. So if we take the definition of a moon being ego and a lens, what Chiron represents is another lens that the soul comes through based on the patriarchal conditioning pattern. Does that make sense?
See if I understand. You say the moon is a lens. Are you also applying that principle to Chiron?
Chiron is what, because look where it is in the solar system, between Saturn and Uranus. So it's what I call a sociological planet. And it's the lens of the societal conditioning pattern that we all inherit from birth. And based on thousands of years of living out of harmony with nature, we now all inherit what that means. And so on the most mundane level, and again, look at where Chiron was discovered. Taurus, 4th house. What's the condition of our food? What's the condition of our environment? And how is that going to impact our ability to survive? These are all Chiron issues. And that's why when Chiron was discovered in 1977, it was the beginning of the environmental movement. It was the beginning of the women's movement. It was the beginning of the men's movement. It was actually the year that something called the Indigenous World Council was formed. So Chiron really represented two things: the manifestation of the wound, but also the sense that we need to heal the wound. They happen simultaneously. Or at least in terms of the human being being ready to use it in astrology. Because obviously people were thinking about these things, but there was definitely a sign in society and a realization of the implications of this kind of stuff.
When we go back to natural living,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean we have to get rid of much of the technology the civilization has developed?
That actually is that's related to Chiron, and Chiron has been opposite Uranus within orb mostly for almost 40 years. So actually computers are Uranus, so there's a real implication there. So, you know, we're not going to go back to total natural living. That can't work. And so like Jeffrey talks about, how are we going to reconnect with the old ways of living, but adjust them to new times, to technology. Now most people who are really involved in these issues, there's a man named Terence McKenna, and he calls it the forward loading. In other words, in many ways, it's going to take a technological solution, probably, to stem the tide. But the whole problem, based on division, lack of cooperation being a matriarchal concept, is that countries aren't harnessing their resources together. So to me, Chiron has a real implication in terms of a lot of Libran issues. Now, if you look at Chiron's birth chart, and this is why many people think Chiron should rule Libra, because of that situation right there. And I think there's a definite affinity for Chiron with Libra, because it's seeking balance. Balance in everything. Balance in how we relate to gender, balance in relationships, balance and harmony. That's what it's about. And so also the concepts of like Libra, one is cooperation, people working together.
Jeffrey said that, he said a lot of people think it rules the 6th house.
Yeah, Chiron.
Working together, is there some kind of...
And so many people think, and Barbara Hand-Clough is one of them, think that Chiron should rule Virgo. And there's a good argument to be, I mean, again, I would just say it has a real affinity to Virgo.
Is there a connection?
Between Virgo and Libra?
Through Chiron. Excuse me. Through Chiron.
I mean, Virgo is just the application of a Chiron issue with Virgo will be, how are we going to use technology? You know, how are we going to think of the whole polarity point Pisces, you know, in terms of the work that we do, service. It's going to relate to retrieving all the old ways of healing. So people typically with strong chirons related to earth signs have natural abilities with herbs, growing food maybe, all those kinds of issues.
What about Earth houses? What about Earth houses?
Earth houses too, yeah, and depending on the birth chart.
The computer, it seems to me, is an important part of this transition because computers are a great equalizer. They let people around the world talk to each other, being controlled or monitored by the powers in these various countries. And so we can talk to, America may be hostile to Iraq, but eventually there will be Iraqis on the internet, and we can talk directly to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people are bypassing the power structure with computers. And so the will of the common people will be more powerful than that of people in power.
That's very possible, and actually, when Chiron's in Aries, which it will be, is for a lot of people, it's almost always opposite Uranus. And not only is it it's one of the biggest ways that Chiron represents this equalizing in terms of Chiron being in Aries, because these people are from about 22 to 32 years old right now. This is the first generation where the gender change will be manifested. Women will be equal to men, if not more in power. And the computer is the means by which this happens, because the computer doesn't care about your gender. If you get the work done, you get the work done.
And here we have the moon at 12 degrees Cancer, which is a degree.
This is true.
Taking a lovely sextile to Mercury in Scorpio. And moon is in the 7th house.
And Scorpio's in the Mercury's in the 11th, which is computers.
So people are, well, the power structure in this last election, the part of the power structure that wants power seemed not to be able to control what people thought. And their thoughts went against what the power structure wanted them to think. And they said, the hell with it.
No, that's true, and that's pretty much, that's, you know, a restatement of, like, the whole internet thing, all of that, the linkage.
They even have strikes and things, so people like, you know, rallying through the internet and
Actually,
being physically in a place.
We'll totally get to that. That's coming.
Okay.
But, so that's kind of an outline of the issues. Now, another really interesting thing about Chiron is that based on its orb and how erratic it is, it spends an exceptionally long time in Pisces and Aries. And so think about that in terms of the Aryan age was the origin of the Garden in Eden myth. And the Pisces age was when Christianity took that myth and spread it all over the country. So here we have Chiron spending most of its time in those two signs. Yes. And it's particularly significant now because it's not very long before most of your clients are going to have either Chiron in Pisces or Chiron in Aries. That's about a 25-year span, little less. So Chiron is really going to become very important, I think. And so I was born with Chiron opposite Pluto, the happy Pluto-Uranus-Virgo generation. And look at, I mean, when you add that symbolism to what happened in the 60s, it just adds more meat to the bone. And so one of the things that I'm encountering, this generation, so we had Pluto and Leo generation. And overall, the Pluto and Leo generation was still very much involved in the American dream. I can access what I want. I'll get mine. But it's very clear to the majority of people in the Pluto-Virgo generation that this can't happen anymore. Most of these people, and that's why, as Jeff says, there's all this angst and depression, and that's the generation with a high amount of suicide because there's an incredible amount of disillusionment, depression. A lot of people actually have Saturn conjunct Chiron opposite Pluto Uranus.
The gloom hippies, what is it called?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, and the reason is, in terms of the transition of the ages, everything in the Pisces age is having to culminate. And it's in this generation that it's truly, truly coming to a head. And one of the things that I see in my practice, evolutionary state they're in, but the ones that are in consensus state or in are still very attached to man on the horse. I mean, there's this attitude of the way, and it's because of the patriarchal conditioning pattern, having to be complete. So there's a great loneliness for these people. And there's the whole stigma of what's it mean to be single in our society. And so it's really disheartening, and it's a difficult thing because, you know, people are having trouble partnering, and the projections for the people in this generation work. So you see, you unhappy in some way, everyone, but a lot of people.
But you also see people on the other side of that. Is that maybe on the other side of that? I mean, and that's all true. I know something so excruciatingly wrong. I was just like, you know, I'd be looking at, I mean, and I'd catch myself, because I never thought I was suicidal at all. I'm not that kind of person by nature. But I'd be like, and I'm like, but the side of that is generation also what is called a political idealist, like taking the 60s values and, you know, putting them in those down to work, literally to work.
And that Pluto Virgo, Chiron Pisces, practical idealist. And absolutely, for the people who are working through it and individuating, then their relationships won't be based on projection. That will be what's necessary for the relationships to work. And then those relationships will be really strong. And most of those people, especially with Chiron and Pisces, are completely wanting to align with spiritual values. That's what matters. And as a matter of fact, this generation, acutely sensitive to what's going on. So the people who are individuated and spiritualizing are coming in and saying, I'm having these dreams, Pisces, the earth being destroyed. These are the people who are coming down with things like fatigue, all these allergies. Nobody can define what's wrong with them. I've been to this doctor, I've been to that doctor. It's created, you know, Pisces relates to the hormones. So people's hormones, based on sensitivities that can't be acknowledged by science, because we can't understand at that level. So there's a lot of that for these people. So they're really sensitive to what's going on, which can make it difficult.
I have to back up just because it's some way I haven't. No, with the allergy thing, what is it? Allergies, sensitivity to?
A lot of allergies are people who are just hypersensitive. Pisces, no boundaries. Body having trouble distinguishing between what's its own cells and what aren't its cells.
Immune diseases.
Immune diseases, Neptune, Pisces.
What's the HIV? It's self-organs.
Sure, all of those things. And what about the implications of when Jeff talked about the Pluto and Leo generation? Pluto and Virgo generation is going to have to do the Virgo thing and figure out how are we going to house all these people. And they're going to feel like they're sacrificing in order to do this because it's a disproportionate population balance. And that's just this country. But that I see Americans. So that's an issue that will have to be dealt with. And it's related to Chiron.
What you gonna do with all these old people, huh?
Huh?
What you gonna do with this?
Well, I mean, it doesn't...
Old people.
It will be an issue. Just in terms of resource, I mean, what is Clinton talking about right now? Social Security, Medicaid. How are we going to make these survive for however long? It's a big issue.
You just have to let us work longer.
Yeah, and you know, it's a Pisces issue. I was reading a study about senility, and the real causal factor for senility is because we don't let these people do anything. That's the real issue. So there's no doubt about it. Yeah, and that's related to Pisces too, actually. Even though it's not that generation that's having the problem yet.
There's going to be a huge money drain into housing old people. It's huge money.
Resources will have to be allocated. And again, the whole Pluto and Virgo generation is going to have to deal with technological issues. How are we going to deal with technology as the environment gets increasingly contaminated? You know, what's it take to change? And that's Pisces doing playing God.
I don't want to make light of this, but I know someone in your 60th generation who bought a hill, like land, and he's like raising his own, he's going to take care of himself, basically, raising his own chickens and his own this, and he's going to, I'm not going to say he's going to have a fortress of guns, but it's like he's wacky.
This is truly happening, and look, right now Chiron is in Sagittarius, transiting, squaring, or it will soon be squaring.
How, like, into a more positive manifestation of the aspect?
I mean, that would just depend on the person coming in and what they needed at the time, and, you know, we can't really, I wouldn't want to project on them what I think. I mean, it's a matter of debate, like how many steps should we be taking at this moment in terms of Taurus, Chiron, Taurus, 4th house, creating self-reliance for ourselves. But what's really interesting about Chiron going into Sagittarius, Pluto's in Sagittarius, squaring these points for this Pluto, Virgo, Chiron, Pisces generation, in the context of Chiron relating to the survival instinct. Everyone, and especially because of this Y2K thing, no matter how overblown it is, even people in the consensus are now saying, what am I going to do to survive if my electricity doesn't work? And maybe some people only think of it for a second, some more, but many people are thinking about how Y2K, the computer bug.
Oh, I don't know anything about it.
Well, so you're not worried about it. But I mean, a majority of my readings, that's a question, every reading. 20 minutes. What do I do? Yeah, and so what's going to happen if things keep polarizing as they are, which is a fact, the haves and the have-nots. If you go all around the planet, there's many, many people living in dire conditions. What happens, and this is where, if you use planetary nodes, it gets really detailed, because Uranus' south node is in Sagittarius, and Pluto is coming on to that, and that's the signature of revolution. So, progressively, it's very possible.
So what degrees in Sagittarius Chiron again?
3 degrees. It's just about to go retro. It will go back into Scorpio for 3 or 4 months. Then it will begin again. And here's what's really interesting. Chiron is going to exactly conjunct Pluto on the last day of 1999.
No way.
And what that means is that everybody on that day is going to take a collective, and everyone, to varying degrees, survival instinct will be kicked in more than ever in most of our lives.
When you mention revolution, what do you mean? Like maybe a third world war or something like that?
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Ever since Chiron went into Sagittarius, which was about 3 months ago, if you watch the news, one of the major issues that's come up is race. So we had this thing in Jasper, Texas, which happened a while ago, but the trial happened, and it was everyone saw and heard about what happened. Now Sagittarius relates to freedom. This is a remnant of one dominant culture through Garden and Eden myth, superiority, inferiority, rationalizing one color skin being subhuman. Sagittarius is about freedom. Well, I'm not saying there's going to be a revolution, but it's interesting that that came up. Then there was this killing in New York City, and I don't know how many people of you are aware of this. A man was killed unarmed, 4 policemen, 40 shots in 5 seconds. He was hit 19 times.
He was just pulling his teeth. He was an African guy, and he was just
That's right.
they just happened to see him, and he was just pulling his teeth out of his pocket to open his door.
Well, I don't even know what the true story is, and it will come out. But the fact is, the repercussion has been that there have been daily demonstrations in New York City. As a matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal was closed based on one of these demonstrations. This is thousands of people are doing this.
Here in California, they put 31 bullets into a teenage girl. That was recent.
That was recent, okay.
And also the homosexual killed
Two of
just
them.
because he was a homosexual. I think what consensus, the consensus is changing in the sense of more of a outrage at this than before. That this is the kind of
Hopefully.
Well, a lot of people think that race relations are deteriorating in this country, but they're not. These acts of violence are the fringe nuts getting nervous at seeing a black man hugging the president on the golf course.
I agree, but you have to remember that small groups of people polarizing can create incredible amounts of turmoil. And the other thing is that there is an inner city issue for many people. I mean, and these are ethnic groups, typically, not white people. And so as Pluto comes closer to the Uranus South Node in Sag, and I'm not saying revolution, but it's really possible that because if your survival instinct gets kicked in, and then it gets filtered through patriarchal conditioning, I mean, that's what Bosnia is about. Those kind of things, right? That kind of projection. And that kind of, I mean, how do people do that?
I can't see anything like
An incredible amount of insecurity.
I can't see anything like a race war. I can see in these incidents done by the fringe nuts. That has, well, for instance, the killing of Martin Luther King. A lot of people said if he had lived, the civil rights movement would have moved ahead a lot faster. That's not true. If he had lived, his extramarital activities would have been coming down gradually. And so his death was a shock to many white people who didn't care less one way or the other, and they became aware of sexual addiction, just like the Rodney King thing. See, in a lot of white people's minds, it made them, bam, right in the face. Here it is. You don't believe it, here it is. A lot of white people changed their minds and decided that we really weren't bitching about nothing. So I think that these acts of violence, as strange as it may seem, I think they have a positive effect on the whole population.
I mean, they can, and
At least I hope so.
hopefully.
What about the LA riots, Manzanito, the huge warning sign, And I don't know, just driving to I flew into LA, and I had to take the super shuttle down, and the driver, who was a very nice man, I'm very talkative, so I was like talking to him, blah, 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 life, and we got stuck, you know, he was just clever, and we got stuck in front of a school because there was people who were picking up their kids from school, and he was like, he got angry because he couldn't get out, he was like blocked in by all these mothers and their kids, and he said, it's all these cancels. You know, they don't care about anybody except themselves. And he's not a fringe movement. He's a regular guy. So I think I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit. I think that element is there. It's not just on the fringe. The fringe are always the most noticeable ones, but people have very ingrained attitudes.
Well, wait. I don't. No debate here, okay? You guys can debate that on your own. No, wait. No, because I want to continue my point, though. I really wanted to talk about Martin Luther King.
Can you say a little bit about that Chiron at the end of 1999 conjunction Pluto? Because when you said, I didn't get quite...
They're going to be exactly conjunct the last day of the year. It means that based on the fact that this Y2K thing is happening and nobody really knows what will happen, and even though it may not be very severe, It's in everyone's mind. What if the grid doesn't work? What if you're in a cold climate and you can't get heat? What if you can't get water? So everybody's survival instinct is going to kick in, and it's in Sagittarius. So when your survival instinct kicks in and you can't use artificial means to survive, you're going to think in terms of natural law, or more in terms of natural law.
Actually, it's going to be beneficial because it's going to push us to think about natural law.
I mean, that's all that's going to happen for the rest of our lives is, to the degree that the human being doesn't get it, increasing cataclysmic evolution to get our attention so that we align with natural law. And that's why it is important, the choices we make now, hopefully. Hopefully we can change things to a degree and make less cataclysm. But I really want to address the Martin Luther King thing, because he had Chiron conjunct Jupiter, exactly conjunct where Chiron was discovered, 12th house. Now think about that. Taurus in the 12th house. That's the ultimate symbol of slavery.
And his death, crazy.
No, his death led to liberation. Absolutely. He had the karma of a martyr.
Christianity, whatever it is.
Exactly. And the 12th house, Chiron 12th house, karma of a martyr.
It's very symbolic. So a lot of these great souls that come to Earth, the greatest thing they do is...
That's true, sometimes. So anyways, and just to take it a little bit further, because the Chiron and Aries generation be this generation where, on some levels, we do see more equality, Aries, Libra, because Pluto's in Libra for those people. It's not necessarily in opposition. The Grammys, a black woman, 23 years old, won more Grammys than anyone has ever done. Ever.
At the same time,
That's
he was dragging this man and thing.
Yeah, well,
Correlation.
yeah, there's absolutely a correlation. So that's an example of the Chiron and Aries phenomena. And you'll be seeing a lot of those people. So when they come in for readings, looking at gender issues, and, you know, many men are going to start to want to be less active, whereas the women are now the ones who are like, I want to actualize myself. So by using Chiron and its aspects, you can see how to help people in those kind of scenarios.
Would you ever, women come in concerning the issue of finding a mate or being married, would you ever advise them that to be without a man is not the worst thing in the world?
It's interesting because the Chiron and Aries generations aren't asking those questions. There's a whole renaissance for those people of these are the guys who go out and drum on the hill, you know, and a lot of the shamanistic things are coming back, and they're pretty young still, but they're not asking the question. They're much less concerned about my life partner, my soulmate thing. There is a more Libra, Pluto Libra ideal. I'm going to do lots of relationships. I'm going to see. So really, you can really see the shift. It's a lighter generation than the Chiron, Pisces, Pluto, Virgo.
Would there be any relationship to the population really rising with his Chiron? And being, you know...
I mean, that's...
The Aryan, I mean, in the sense of the rise of the Aryan nation again.
I hadn't thought, but Pisces would rule prisons. And I don't know, but I would guess that the majority of the prison population has a Chiron and Pisces now, based on that, where ages are.
And most of them are in because of drugs. Getting busted with little drugs.
Drugs.
Lock them up.
Absolutely.
Most of them are black.
Yeah.
70% male.
Latino population.
That's where, if there's going to be a revolution, I would think. The revolution, because that's where, I mean, it's just escalating to incredible. We're just locking everybody up. Feel safe. Talk about...
Not everybody, really.
But there are these issues.
Almost, if you get because of a warrant for a parking ticket, if you can go to jail for that, I mean,
There's a difference between jail and prison.
yes, there is, but it's a contact with that whole Aryan kind of, anyway, I wondered if there was a connection to that.
I hadn't really thought about it a lot, but the Chiron and Pisces one rings to me.
There's a lot of uncovering stuff now about black men in particular being railroaders. It's being uncovered. There's quite a few black men getting out of jail after 18 and 20 years where they withheld evidence, framed them and stuff like that. The one that would come to mind would be Geronimo Pratt.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sign of a revolution of some kind too. When we think of a revolution, we think about people going out fighting and shooting and killing each other, but there can be a revolution of ideas.
Yeah, but there's a global issue. I think it's more important than that.
Oh, this is fun.
Unequal distribution as well.
That's
So
true.
we've got a class type tension that is, it's global, and it's coming more and more to the West. The rest of the world, like the so-called developing the third world, it's so polarized, you can't believe, it's incredible.
All Chiron issues. And look at Chiron's birth chart. Look at all those planets in Libra. Polarization.
It's right in the chart.
If you want to learn Chiron, throw in the planetary nodes, meditate on that chart. The whole history of patriarchy is right there, and the possible implications of it. It's all there.
Chiron comes to heal that.
That's the potential, but it can go either way.
But there's another issue showing in the chart, is that the discovery of Chiron is picking up on, if I'm saying things that you were going to say, just tell me to shut up.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry. That was really fun.
No, go ahead. Talking good stuff. Go ahead.
The humankind as a whole is picking up on a work that it started but is now needing to complete. Okay, I'm sure you can see that in the chart. Which he's staring us all right in the face. Pluto conjunction node is exactly 15 degrees of Libra when Chiron is discovered. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And like not only is Libra the sign of finally reaching equality, but 15 degrees, the very critical middle point.
Mm-hmm.
And it says something also about how it's going to happen. That's where the famous Pleiades are.
Okay, I hadn't thought of that. But if you look at that symbol, when Pluto's conjunct the North Node, evolutionarily speaking, that implies that lesson has been worked on, but not completed.
Yeah.
And so typically, there's much work. And so that's in the 10th house. That is a symbol of stratification of society as a global issue, based on the polarization of people, based on the polarization of gender. And the fact is that, we're working on balancing that Libra, but we haven't got there yet. That is the potential, and it has a lot to do with, people taking responsibility for themselves versus the pattern of codependence, which says, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. If you look at Venus's conjunct that Pluto in the 10th house, if you look at Venus's planetary node, it's in Scorpio, 11th house, and Vesta's there. So what are the implications around sexuality and reclaiming the ancient sexuality that, like Uli was talking about yesterday, in terms of helping us rebalance versus the 10th house guilt that we all carry, that is a causal factor for rage, 10th house.
Well, Mars here is squaring Chiron, and Mars is ruling.
Well, that's the other fascinating thing about the chart is you can go forever. Jupiter is conjunct the moon in Cancer 7th, squaring the moon. Now, in psychological terms, it's called a Madonna horror complex, a complete separation of the and. So many women are dealing with the issue of either I'm a good woman or I'm a bad woman, based on these old conditioning patterns, right? Can't have it both ways. All of the masculine planets, Mars is square Uranus, Sun, Leo, Scorpio, which actually even indicates a castration complex, which is the causal factor for men fearing women.
And could that take us right back to the first patriarchy, which didn't really get it as right as some people would like to believe?
And the point isn't even really matriarchy, patriarchy, because that's, you're always convention, and you're going to have to pass heritage one way or another. But the point is that there were times where human beings were living in harmony, and there were times, you know, there were places where it hasn't been. So how are we going to create models that create the harmonization versus superior, inferior, and, you know, everything that we have?
I'm just thinking what Walter said, and you know, when we got to the little back and forth, and I think they're both true, really. Even, you know, about Libra bringing it to balance, because you know, Mumia, do you know who that is?
No.
He's on the East Coast. This is a big deal. I don't know if you know that Mumia is a black journalist who's on death row.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him.
But that's a very, at least on the East Coast, this is a huge, huge deal. And I think he was denied
A new trial.
a new trial. And this is like, so, you know, it's the opposite of what you said. So I think they're both, you see what I'm saying? They're both, he's in jail. And most people think he's innocent, pretty much, that he got set up. But there's a big, big, huge anger in life around that.
And that's good,
Yeah.
because you've got to care to be angry.
Yeah.
So the more white people are angry about it, the more I like.
So I'm just saying both things I think are happening when you say
Sure.
that
Sure.
there's more.
It's all good.
What's interesting is that it's anger, like Chiron is from Aries, so it's like anger, within our generation, that anger is an instant emotional reaction to opposites.
Sure. And so one of the things for your generation will be, as women access power, which they're doing, and as a matter of fact, you can clearly see this. The women finally have a basketball league, correct?
Yeah.
This basketball league was formed when Chiron was in Libra. Every woman in that league has Chiron in Aries. Every one. Now think about that. No, but the implication is that the field is equaling. If you watch how these women play basketball, it's incredible. 15 years ago, so there's this acceleration of the equalization, and women are now accessing thousands of years of their rage. So if women just access that rage and do the patriarchal thing, that's not going to be a healing either. And I'm not saying men don't deserve it, but that's not going to help the planet overall. But, you know, there's a rationale for that anger, certainly.
Well, everyone is waiting to see what part Mrs. Clinton is going to play in the future. A lot of people are hoping that she jumps in.
Hey, just to throw this, the whole time the Clinton thing happened, Chiron was conjuncting Hillary Clinton's Venus.
Yeah. Good stuff.
So anyways, there's just a few, I don't know how long I've gone, I'm working on some future stuff that I'll just throw at you as examples, because I think on a mundane level, Chiron transits, and particularly looking at its nodal axis, are going to be real keys into seeing possible future events, particularly in terms of environmental issues, disasters sometimes. So a really good example is that when Chernobyl blew up, Pluto was at 3 degrees Scorpio, exactly conjunct Chiron's north node in Scorpio. And Scorpio rules nuclear power. So,
Pluto was, can you just say the configuration? I'm sorry.
Pluto was at 3 degrees Scorpio, and Chiron's north node was 3 degrees Scorpio. So things like that, you know, look at Chiron's nodal axis, and it does move like 8 degrees, and you'll be able to see stuff, anticipate what will happen. Another example is Israel is a really pivotal place at this time.
I was there this summer.
Yeah, and look what's happening in Israel. New election. It's going to have a major significance who gets voted in. And if you look at Israel's chart, Pluto, Saturn, conjunct in Leo, 10th house, squaring a south node in Scorpio, conjunct Chiron in Scorpio, in the 2nd house.
Pluto, I gotta do that. Pluto, Saturn, conjunct in Leo.
10th house, squaring Chiron, conjunct south node in Scorpio. So Israel's a major player in terms of the patriarchal doctrine. And look at those planets, 10th house Leo. That's a power thing.
How about
Scorpio.
Nelson Mandela of South Africa? Is somehow also very sort of influenced by Chiron?
I would check it out and tell me. I would bet.
Policy that he has introduced, which is unique, and the way that he was in prison for so many years. To finally go out and try to start healing that country.
My perception is that the issue of genocide, although it may be ultimately a Pluto issue, is also really related to Chiron. And to me, it feels like Chiron is kind of, because of its movement being quicker than Pluto, it's kind of how things happen. Whereas Pluto's slow moving and will be a more of a, a deep influence. Chiron kind of will show manifestation.
By August this year, there's going to be a great square forming in the transit.
In the fixed signs.
It's by August it's going to be. And I was wondering in which way Chiron plays a role in this, because I've heard that this is going to be a reflection of economic disaster in the whole planet. And hopefully, I don't want to say hopefully it will happen, because it's probably what's going to move people to change, but it's going to be very painful for us. For us, it's already, we are in economic disaster in my country.
Yeah, I mean, you are a perfect example. And so...
And it's very painful, but at least we know that, at least I don't know about you, but that's probably what's going to have people moving towards creating something new. Yet this square that is forming, I don't know when was the last time something like that happened. And I'm sure Chiron is playing an important role in the effect that that's going to have in terms of going in a new direction of creating something new.
And I mean, the Chiron in Sag and the Pluto in Sag would be, the intention of that Sagittarius rules intuition. So many people are really feeling, especially at this time, that the center of gravity in their brain is shifting from the left brain to the right brain. That's one implication. So that will be your greatest source of information, right? In order what to do. As things get more severe, though, the negative side of Sagittarius will be different factions promoting their own agendas and saying my way is the only way. And so it certainly can indicate conflicts between ideologies, which is what's happening big time, particularly Islam,
I was going to ask you, because you're talking about Israel, and when I was over there this summer, it seemed that I kept focusing on Jerusalem as the city.
Mm-hmm.
The Dome of the Rock, is, the button. It almost seems like you could press something there and everything would go. But in Jordan, I don't know if Jordan's birth had one, Hussein died, and he, at the last minute, changed his, for some reason my intuition told me it's a very crucial thing that happened. He changed his will. Instead of his brother, who knew all his policies and who, worked with him at it for years and years, all of a sudden he said, no, you're not the successor. It's my son, who's very inexperienced in politics, who's a military person.
I am not educated at all on that matter.
But that's very crucial with what's going to happen with Israel.
All those players are really crucial, so it remains.
Chiron might be an area you might be able to bring the energy that they need.
That's very possible.
To realize his brother has
If I had to say, my intuition is, and I know nothing about the intuition is that the sun was the more appropriate choice and the better for the planet. That's totally my intuition. And that this other man was much more of a political power monger. And that was Hussein's insight as he was dying. And that's, I have no facts for that information, so take it where you want. Well,
the clearing of
yeah, I think I'll do the chart.
on the impeachment, to me, was a very important, significant thing, because the hardline right wing ran up against him, tried to take him up, and they lost. So I think they're losing all down the line in all phases of human activity worldwide. It's the last stand battle.
Well, you have to remember that still a lot of power, and the fact that they could even carry it on as long as they did. I mean, in other words, again, it's great that the American people have the perception, but still there's some really strong forces. In other words, it feels to me like Clinton, that was a consensual sexual affair. Chiron was highly implicated, by the way. It was opposite his moon. He's born with Chiron conjunct Venus and Libra. And so a lot of it also related to our own issues of judgment, patriarchal patterns, projected all over Clinton. You know, he was truly a martyr in many ways. And not to say that, I mean, he does have the signature of someone with major sexual issues. And this new, I mean, it's disturbing that this new woman came up with this rape thing, but it's hard to know the truth of it. It was 20 years ago. But in Monica Lewinsky's case, it doesn't seem like at all legitimate to me in terms of to oust the president. And there actually is quite a bit of evidence of the kind of conspiracy that it was. But it's just our media is controlled by people with money, you know, all these issues, and that's related to Chiron.
There was a racial overtone to this thing with Clinton too, because it's very clear that he likes black people.
He's a really, you know, and he's my favorite president in terms of policy, in terms of talking about the environment, in terms of talking about equality. I mean, Clinton, when he was inaugurated, it was around the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. He understood the Neptune-Uranus conjunction as well as any astrologer I've ever heard. It was right there. So
he shows, well, it's a racial thing, and it's a woman thing too.
He's been good for both, and he gets huge votes from both of those populations.
And this picture of him, he and Jordan embracing each other on the golf course. They have jammed that picture at the public over and over, you know, and the president says, yes, this man is my best friend, and anybody that don't like it, up their nose.
Okay.
And then on top of that, they tried to keep showing pictures of him hugging Monica. To me, that gave him great respect for me, because the normal businessman would say, when I'm outside, don't talk to me. He recognized that woman, put his arm around her, and I think that endeared him to a lot of women. He respected her.
What about bombing Iraq, though?
Well, that's not cool.
Anyways, I think what I'd like to do is, if anybody, is anybody interested in seeing this applied on a chart?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we take like a 10-minute break, and then we'll do it. Okay, so this is Jennifer's chart, and what I'll do is I'll just do a pretty simple analysis. I'm going to use the planetary nodes, give you some exposure to that, how I do it, and how I combine it with the Chiron thing, and I won't try to limit questions unless you're really unclear, and I don't want to argue philosophy. But I want to present, you know, I want to present what I do, and then maybe afterwards, if there's really a ton of questions, we can get into it. So the way that I would look at this chart is, I like to look at the planetary nodes of Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter, just because it's going to give you a really big picture, context of that imprint of the transition. And in her case, Pluto and Saturn are about 20 Capricorn in her 12th house. The Jupiter South Node is in Capricorn, 11th house. It's like 4 degrees Capricorn. So when I look at this also, the other thing I'd want to look at is the ruler of Capricorn, because all these nodes are Capricorn. So they're disposed. Saturn in Leo, conjunct the Sun, Venus, Mercury. So, in astrology, Capricorn, 12th house, what we give ultimate meaning to on the deepest levels. So if you put Capricorn there, you see imprint. And remember, the 12th house is highly sensitive, lack of boundaries. So in some ways, this imprint was taken on deeply, wholesale. So it's Capricorn. And Saturn in Leo in the 7th. Sorry. It's okay. So you can see that in whatever way the imprint that was taken on was related with the Leo issues of power, of self-actualization. Capricorn represents society, and the imprint of the patriarchy was to stratify society. When you put Jupiter and Capricorn in the 11th, you can see that this is going to relate to groups within the society in a Capricornian way. So you have rich, poor, women, men, inferior, superior. Again, Saturn in Leo, Sun in Leo, Venus in Leo. This is a person who's wanted to actualize themselves. They want to have power. They want to have total control of their reality. So, on some level, unconsciously, she took on the patriarchal doctrines of what power was. She also has Pluto in Libra in the 8th house. So, for one thing, we know that Libra tends to operate to extremes. So what this say to me, for one thing, it's going to relate to sexuality. It's also going to relate to take different kinds of roles within these scenarios. So, a lot of times with Pluto and Libra in the 8th, you know, we would want to look at how is she relating to the feminine in terms of as a prostitute, as a means of accessing power. Because that Libra, which was Greek Rome, that was the choice. A woman had two choices, right? Good woman, which meant what Jeff talked about, being a wife, but meant you were basically a slave, 12th house south nodes. Or prostitute, which meant she had power to control her own reality. She could own land. She herself in a limited kind of way. So you can see probably that's an issue within her subconscious. Also, one of the, then when I, in context of the South Node in Taurus, the Chiron in Taurus, we can see this is relating clearly to issues. Having power, having money, and self-worth. Also, in terms of the Leo, what are one of the constructs of patriarchal societies are, we have to compete. We have to be the best to get what we want. Also, there's an underlying assumption within patriarchy that only the best, Leo, get the cream. So you can see that there's been, this is a person on some level who works really hard to get what they want within the constructs of patriarchal society. But you can also see that there have been lifetimes where, in terms of the Leo and the 7th house, needing to conform Saturn to what society says in order to get what she wants and needs. So this is going to constitute a on some level, because in order for some people to have, others can't have. And I bring that up because the Chiron is in the Taurus in the 3rd house. The other implication to this, to me, would be lifetimes of real power and wealth inherited. Capricorn, Leo, Taurus, money. But also lifetimes of destitution, both ways. Because of, for the same reasons, you know, and also the Pluto's in Libra. So there's going to, the way that the balance is achieved is by experiencing both. Now just when you look at Chiron, and Chiron's in the South Node in Taurus, how would this look in natural law? What would be a way that she could, you know, make this a natural thing? And we got to talk about it last night, and the implication to me about this is within realizing that there's enough for everybody. That one of the roles that she can play is to realize that in order to empower herself, it doesn't mean someone else needs to be disempowered. Sometimes there can be, you know, based on the Pluto in the 8th, also Mars is in Virgo, feelings that I'm not deserving, which create the self-fulfilling prophecy of trouble with money. But That's the big thing I see with the Chiron is that harmonization, the self-reliance, the realizing that one of her great gifts with this would be that not only can she have what she needs, but she can help others realize that they can have what they need. And this would also go into, I mean, she has Neptune in the 10th house in Sagittarius, so this is a person who's concerned with justice in terms of society, highly idealistic. I see a really great teacher, for instance. Have you ever thought of teaching? Yeah? Real gifts with children. Also, typically with this, though, will be, unresolved issues with children. And having babies would be, a way for you to solve those issues. And ultimately, the North Node in Chiron, again, that's really in the 9th house, in Libra, ruled by the Venus in Leo, is pretty much what I just stated about the fact that equality for all kind of thing, the harmonization, and ultimately this realization that, because we live in a really competitive society, and that's one of the patriarchal overlays. So this is about manifesting, and that's why Chiron's North Node is in Libra so much, again, because can we create cooperation between people? Can people still have their needs met while cooperating? Now, a lot of us are taught that we can't. That's what I was taught. I had to be the best. So within you is the feeling, I need to be the very best, yes? Yes. And so that to me is the major Chiron issue around that. And in my opinion, too, that will actually be what creates, by vibration, the flow for you, because it won't be a conflict and a struggle. The other thing, did I hear you, what was the part you got in the movie? Doing what role? I heard you say to Jeffrey?
They just called me today, actually. The movie is about these street kids, and the character that I play is a prostitute. But at the end of the movie, what happens is she regains her power or whatever and ends up helping kids on the street.
Now look at the symbolism. Okay? I mean, that is the chart. That is so the chart. That's amazing. And obvious implication of being a teacher here. Something as a part of your gifts. And Chiron around healing other people. And yourself. Perfect time. So really, I mean, that would be the context, within which I would do a reading. That would be what was going on in my mind. And then depending on how the person, what kind of questions they ask, how they want to approach it. And that, I hope what I got across is that the dual part of the Chiron. And I always look at charts, from both perspectives, patriarch and matriarch. That kind of lens. Look at it both ways. How is it person taking it on? How is the person going to get out of it almost, so to speak? And Chiron is really the key. And so Chiron is conjunct Chiron South Node and the South Node. So this person has come in with really unique healing abilities. And that's, the intention is to heal. And it could easily be movies, so that people vicariously, Taurus, have some kind of catharsis, the Scorpio 9th house, for their own emotional healing through your acting. And then, especially in the context, that Neptune in the 10th Sagittarius is trining all those Leo planets, which means that you have the ability to tap into a unique collective vision that many, many people will relate to, and that will feel Leo good about themselves, whole, in the context of the Chiron, and even talking, in movies.
Right, communication.
Communications, and ultimately, based on the roles you pick, right, what kind of values are you going to be presenting in the movies that you pick? And maybe at some point the choice will come for you well, I can do this really movie that will make me rich and popular, but it won't be reflecting my values. Or I can do this movie, well, not as many people will see it, but it will mean something. You'll probably have to make those choices if your career goes in a certain direction. That'll be a Chiron. That will relate to Chiron for you.
Or else creating movies myself.
Or, and ultimately, yeah. And so with the polarity point of Pluto, second house Aries, you know, with your Mars in Virgo also in the 8th, that's why you need those affirmations to allow yourself to empower yourself and feel okay about that.
Right.
Yeah, and that is the intention. Complete, that's, Aries second house is about a symbol of self-reliance and intention you could see. So really, and ultimately, to be your own authority.
What were you saying? Did you see anything with the grandparents? I know that was that was that Chiron create anything with the, would you see that?
Chiron's related to the grandparents for sure. What happened here is you have Moon conjunct North Node in the house of the grandparents. So as we talked about, what the heritage of your family has been intensely creative women, but due to patriarchy, haven't been able to access or even feel that they have the right to access that part of themselves. And then as your mother has started that movement forward, but you're the link in the chain, and look, it's conjunct the North Node. Scorpio, whole new self-image based on Scorpio, empowering yourself. And the Pluto, it's always interesting when Pluto rules the North Node, right? Because it represents past, but it's also ruling your own resolution, you know? So, and also Pluto in the 8th would be, you know, even relating to the genetic thing. So you see how something's been passed down to you. A really strong relationship. And so from an energetic, like if Uli would be, you know, frothing at the mouth with his family sculpting for this kind of setup. Because you're, but you are the link, and you know, in that belief system, you can change the karma for generations.
That's the 8th house Pluto that you were just talking about?
No, we're just about that.
The moon conjunct the moon. The Pluto's related to it because it's ruling it, but it's specific to the moon, and even the Uranus is there, so it's liberating from.
What was your question about the grandparents?
I didn't hear the
Oh, no,
question.
last time we were just talking about, well, the Chiron's in the 3rd house is the polar opposite of the 9th house. I just thought that was also symbolism of breaking the cycle or the karma of all these women in my family have been creative, you know, or extremely creative, but they haven't been able to actualize it because of religion and theatrical society that's pulling at everything. And so we were talking, I thought that the Chiron was one of the symbols that showed that I could break that limit.
Well, and it's opposite all that. So it's tied in, and it's about ultimately, you know, reclaiming your true values and then acting upon them, you know. And the Venus is in Leo in the 7th house, you know, so projecting your thing, whatever that is. And hopefully it's based on Venus, Leo, Taurus, your values, not what society says. That's probably been a past life trap for you. It's like, this is what society wants me to do, I'll do it so I get my Leo needs met. And then, of course, there's, you know, whatever this kind of Pluto in the 8th and the Scorpio Taurus, I mean, you're resolving sexual issues in terms of what's been passed on.
No, and Jeff even said, was kind of talking, you know, he was talking about the whole, that Hollywood casting couches, blah, 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 and, you know, you're going to have these offers made to you to, you know...
The temptation to sell yourself, absolutely.
And it was so funny because that was last year, and 2 instances, completely, I was given that option. I mean, and of course, it's no. But...
Yeah, cool.
Good for you.
Yeah.
For breaking the chain.
Any questions? Getting blinded.
So would the chiron then be linked to like the logical, rational?
For her, to me, I mean, you know, see, the thing with Chiron is you can get into everything. And Chiron, to me, is really related to right brain, left brain. And another thing that it's related to, I bet you'll find, is learning disabilities, or the label learning disability. And I would also guess that there's varying degrees, like some people do have chemical imbalances. Other people do just come from natural law. And I haven't done the research yet, but if anyone's interested, check it out and find out. Because if you learn medical astrology, I'm sure you'll be able to know who's who. And that will be like to know who needs what. For some people, it's just about meditation, doing the right exercise, you know, but they're getting labeled as dysfunctional. So, in her case, that was quite a divergence, but in her case, I mean, I wouldn't guess that that's an issue.
No, but there was definitely times that the wound being in the third house, I wasn't able to always communicate what I believed, or else when I did communicate what I believed, there was a negative, or I got negative.
I mean, yep.
But now, how to communicate what I believe in a language that other people can understand,
and a definite fear of persecution. Yeah, absolutely. And so, and the way I'd look at the Chiron, because it's conjunct the South Node, that means you have something to offer, something that you've worked on before. And this is a beautiful symbol for a storyteller. Venus in the 7th Leo, Chiron in Taurus, telling your story, you know. And ultimately, the Neptune is in Sag, you know, when discovering your own natural law, you know, and it's trining those Leos. So it's really beautiful symbolism.
Just an observation that, Jennifer, from the last time we were in class, your voice has really changed, and it's like so noticeable. I mentioned it to you, it's like, whoa, her voice. It's like lower, fuller. The range, I mean, like the fullness of it is striking. I just wanted to give you that.
Yeah, I mean, the tape is, and it's really...
And look, talk therapy. Chiron 3rd house. I mean, you talk to yourself, Taurus.
And then having all that Leo stuff, because with that, I do need the recognition, but the tape is like I'm doing it myself. So when I go out on the auditions or whatever, it's like I don't have that desperate Leo need to have recognition from everybody because I can do it myself with the tape. So
and that's ultimately, I mean, totally the symbolism of coming from your self-reliance, just being who you are. That will create the Leo feedback that you want versus the opposite, you know, approach. And coming from neediness, it will repel what you want. That's how this is set up. Absolutely. And you can see that there's squares to the nodes, right? So it means you've acted on that north node before, which means there have been times where your 9th house been less than totally honest based on wanting to get the feedback that you desire.
Sure, and well, in Libra, the compromising, I'm sure.
Pluto and Libra, in many ways, 2nd house polarity point, that's an absolute signature of no compromise. I mean, we all compromise in some ways, but on the ultimate principles and values, you shouldn't compromise whatsoever. Well, good. I feel complete.
Okay, today's schedule, we're going to do Scorpio through Capricorn today, and then later on today, Uli and Mark will be teaching you what's called a planetary method of health interpretation. This is a system that came through me and, to my knowledge, no other astrologer except evolutionists have employed. But you'll find that once it's presented to you, and the method of it, once you get used to it, it's an absolutely precise way of eliminating analytical errors in your deductive analysis. Because one of the great beauties in that system, particularly combined with the house system, which Uli and Mark have already been showing you, it uncovers what we call repeating themes in the birth chart. And that's one of the very first things you ever want to determine when you look into a birth chart, what we call repeating themes, because obviously repeating themes in a horoscope are going to demonstrate or correlate to what we can call bottom lines, or the foundation upon which a house is built. And when you find those repeating themes, you can pretty much know or understand that those repeating themes, because they're bottom line based, will then condition essentially the rest of the chart. So anyway, that's our sequence today. And somewhere in the middle of it all, we'll do our school photo. So before we march along in our ever happy journey, is there any questions from the preceding material that you'd like to ask? Perfectly clear. Good.
Half the night with Scorpio in 8th house, being the house of marriage. And I finally considered the death of singleness. It's still
The what? The death of singleness. Also. That's right, because, see, obviously once we commit ourselves to someone, and in a committed relationship, one of the very first things that occurs in any relationship, we tend to confront one another's personal limitations, which is the actual intention of a relationship, i.e., to come together to confront one's limitations in order to metamorphosize / evolve beyond them. Sounds like Scorpio stuff, huh? You know, in your reference to the implied crises of losing one's individuality, well, we now see the inconjunction between the 8th house cusp and Aries. And all the adjustments. See?
sometimes quite painful.
And most people in the beginning of a relationship also tend to confront the nature of the projections that they are making on one another. Okay. Any other comments and or astute questions? I have my devices. My Scorpio.
Glad I got mine.
So, Scorpio, this is ruled by Pluto, of course, and it's a natural water archetype, of course, it's yin, and it's intrinsically fixed. I mean, think of that combination of archetypes: Pluto, yin, fixed, water. You could, this is the most intense archetype of all, because in combination, those archetypes correlate with concentration. To concentrate, to condense. No different than squeezing orange to make juice, essence. So it's also why probably when we consider Scorpio, we might want to just shift a little bit of our understanding of water, make it more in the area of petrol or gasoline. gasoline, something volatile, still a fluid. So, clearly we're looking at the whole issue of the soul here. Now, Pluto has, of course, direct correlation with the soul. And then through extension, it's evolution. So, clearly we're looking at a simultaneous process called evolution and soul. The issue of the soul, a simple definition that we can all relate to, is the soul is simply an immutable, meaning that which cannot be destroyed, an immutable consciousness. And within that consciousness slash soul, there are two antithetical and or opposing desires that correlate with the evolution of the soul. One desire, of course, is to separate away from everything that it is not. And the other desire, of course, is to return to that which is the origin of the soul, which you can call God. The evolution of the soul, then, is simply based on the progressive elimination, Scorpio, of all separating desires to the exclusion of only one desire that can remain, and that is, in fact, to unite with the Source. Now, this simple, natural truth, it's not a metaphysics, it's not a belief system, it's a natural law, meaning anything which is a natural law is simultaneously universal. It has nothing to do with cultures, religions, colors of skin, male or female. And the simplest way to validate this natural truth is in the following way. Everyone on this planet, everyone in this room, can have whatever separating desire. The new lover, the new possession, the new career post, whatever. And the individual may in fact have the capacity to obtain that which they are desiring of a separating nature. Ah, I've got that new lover. I've got that new post. I've got that new possession. And of course, it creates a temporary sense of satisfaction. But what soon replaces this, of course, is the psychology and the emotion of dissatisfaction. The sense of something more, i.e. the next lover, the next possession. But ultimately the psychology of dissatisfaction is a echo and or mirror of the desire to return / unite with the Source. And until we exhaust, that is to say eliminate, all separating desires, the cycle of satisfaction-dissatisfaction, of course, occurs. Now, who does not know this universal natural law for yourself? There you have it. So this natural law is reflected, of course, in the soul / Pluto. In nature, via natural law, there are two kinds of evolution which we can observe beyond debate, has nothing to do with belief systems, etc. One kind of evolution reflects Darwin's notion of evolution, called the theory of uniformity. This theory, by the way, came out in the early 1800s through a series of superconjunctions in Pisces. Now look at that, the theory of uniformity. Now, this is obviously what we observe. This is the kind of evolution that is slow yet progressive, non-cataclysmic. Then, of course, there's the other kind of evolution that we call cataclysmic evolution. Obviously, an example in natural law that reflects this would be something like an earthquake, cataclysmic. And just as the symbolism of an earthquake implies, we go through a cataclysmic type of evolution. Our whole life, most parts of it, tend to be utterly reformulated. Now, in general, for most people on our planet, the majority, the way most experience the life, most of the life is uniform evolution with a few cataclysmic events kicked in. That's the general rule. And then, of course, you can, relative to the Qing, you can have extremity, meaning some people, for their own purposes, design some lives of almost perpetual cataclysm. And, of course, the opposite extreme, zero cataclysm. And combinations in between, realizing that the norm, the majority, is uniform life with a few cataclysmic events kicked in. How many know this to be your own truth? You know. Now, in my own case, with Pluto aspecting all planets, and Scorpio rising with 3 planets rising in Scorpio, and Uranus in the 8th, you can probably tend to deduce that this particular life has been a series of cataclysms. It was perpetual, with a few years here and there. Peace. Like, so, I kind of literally wrote the book on it, actually. So. Funny, when I go through certain events, I actually find myself reading my own book. This is weird. So this is the average. And then the question, of course, becomes, what is a causative factor for a cataclysmic event? There are 2 causes by way of human consciousness. One cause is via free choice, Pluto, Scorpio, 8th house, free choice. Some individuals, Scorpio, will resist via choice making, facing and or accomplishing, dealing with the lessons in a particular life. And when it's no different than a fault line. When you have a certain degree of critical mass, the fault snaps. So in a very similar way, by way of an accumulation of resistance to necessary lessons and tensions, this reaches a critical mass state, like a red line in a tachometer. And when critical mass is reached, and evolution is determined by the soul, this will manifest as a cataclysmic event. Now, the other cause is karmic. I can go out here on the street if I wish, and kill somebody, just for my amusement, if I wish. Especially in a country like this, that has no control of guns. It's the most ridiculous policy I've ever heard in any country. And I could either get killed in the very next minute, which is cataclysmic to me. Every action have an apportionate reaction. Or the reaction to that action can in fact occur in another life. When that's actually the case, this is when people feel confused in terms of why is this cataclysmic event happening to me? Because most people can't bring forwards through conscious memory their prior lifetimes. There's only about 10% or so of folks on the planet that can do that in terms of planetary population. And since most people can't do that, this is why there's no awareness as to why. And if you don't have an awareness of why, you're not going to have an ability to resolve. These classic demonstration of this would be being killed in that next life without knowing why.
Do things like, if that's the case, and you've had a very cataclysmic life, do things like a past life regression are
If you really need to know, sure. But if you do it that way, then you have to be very, very careful with the hypnotherapist you would choose, because essentially you would have to tell that hypnotherapist, look, I only want to go to the prior life, the, in which the original cause took place, versus opening up a whole can of worms. Because this is God's law. You can ask yourself the question, why is it that, of all ways for God has made to make creation, why is it that the majority of people at any given time cannot remember their prior lifetimes? It's just as possible for that to occur. And the reason from God's view is really simple. Actually, in the end, all truths are simple. And from God's view, the answer is that most people have that capacity. Most people would get so consumed in what happened, didn't happen, what went right, what went wrong, blah, blah, they wouldn't get on with the purposes of this life. That undermine the focus of this life. That's why. That's also why all the great ones have the common teaching. Seek God, Goddess only. Ask for nothing else. And then, as Jesus taught, whatever else is meant to be added onto you will be added onto you. But only by seeking God first. So it's meant to be in your domain of having that capacity. It will come. But as an individual who has this capacity, I will tell you something. It is an absolute burden. Because when the light is turned on, so to speak, you cannot turn it off. How would you like to be standing in the Lucky Market checkout line and see the entire past life history of the checkout person? And you're tired and you're cranky and you want to go home and... You understand? So it can be a real burden.
I bet it explains a lot of interactions, though, doesn't it?
I'm sorry?
I bet it explains a lot of interactions. Say that same clerk gives you a snub in his Rugio, you see their past lives, and you might know exactly why they're being the way they are right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
The fact that there are certain people that are able to turn that light on as much as other people never turn that light on, I'm sure there's a reason why those people turn that light on, and it must be significant, or that they are hopefully prepared to know what to do with that information.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
There's lots of reasons. Not, as in all things on earth, there's no one reason.
Can you get past life like flashes of dreams? You can get past life like flashes or distant dreams.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Would you say that seeing in past lives is giving you, as a matter, as you need to know the information that comes to you? Would you say that would be?
All the time. You want to do chart readings for people who observe me. The chart is just a smoke screen. It's just fucking in the head.
That ability to see past lives is obviously a gift from God to those that are willing to do good. But it's also some people who have that with evil intent. Have that?
Yes. And that will manifest as manipulating people relative to that information. I mean, this capacity, if you will, was given to me as a boy. early on, and that's because of this mother I had.